My fiancée said she was sleeping at her mom's. At 5 a.m., a taxi dropped her off outside our apartment. The driver yelled, "Good night, babe." I never thought I'd end up writing something like this, but here I am. For context, my name is Jordan. I'm 29, and until a few months ago, I was engaged to a woman I thought I knew inside and out. Her name is Melissa. We had been together for almost 5 years, engaged for a little under one. Things weren't perfect. We had our share of arguments about money and her long work hours, but nothing ever made me think she was capable of lying to my face in such a deliberate way. That all changed one morning at 5 o'clock. The night before, Melissa told me she was heading to her mom's place because her mom had been feeling lonely. I didn't question it. Melissa's mom, Donna, is a widow and still struggles sometimes with the empty house, so Melissa going over there made sense. I kissed her goodbye around 8:30 p.m., watched her grab an overnight bag, and figured that was that. Except around 5 a.m., I woke up because of noise outside our apartment. Our bedroom window faces the street, and I could hear the hum of a car idling. Out of habit, I peeked through the blinds, and there she was, Melissa, stepping out of a taxi. She wasn't carrying the overnight bag she left with, just her purse slung over her shoulder. She looked tired, but not in the way someone looks after sleeping at their mom's house. What really got me, though, was the driver leaning out the window and calling after her, "Good night, babe." He said it loud enough that it echoed on the empty street. Melissa didn't even turn back. She just gave him a quick wave and rushed toward the door of our building. I froze at the window, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. My stomach dropped. The driver's words weren't something you'd ever say to a regular passenger. It wasn't just casual friendliness. It carried familiarity, intimacy, like he wasn't just a stranger driving fares around. And Melissa's reaction, the way she avoided looking back at him, confirmed what I already knew deep down. Something was wrong. Instead of waiting in the living room or demanding answers the moment she came through the door, I forced myself back into bed and pretended to be asleep. She crept into the bedroom about 10 minutes later, moving cautiously like she was trying not to wake me. I felt the mattress dip as she climbed in, smelled faint traces of perfume that hadn't been there before, and heard her shallow breathing while she lay awake beside me. That morning when I got up for work, I acted normal. Made coffee, asked how her mom was doing, and Melissa answered with a straight face. She said her mom had been fine, just needed some company. She even added a little detail about watching a late-night movie together. I remember nodding, pretending to listen, but in my head I was replaying the scene from the window over and over again. Here's the thing about me. I'm not confrontational unless I have to be. My first instinct wasn't to explode or accuse her. It was to watch, to collect every piece of the puzzle until there was no doubt left. I wasn't about to give her the chance to twist my words or make me think I was imagining things. The first step was checking her story. On my lunch break that day, I called Donna. I kept it casual, just asking how she'd been and if Melissa had stayed over. Donna seemed confused. She told me Melissa hadn't been by the house in weeks, but she was planning to visit soon. My chest tightened hearing that. I didn't push her for more because I didn't want to raise suspicion, but the confirmation was all I needed. Melissa had lied to me directly that morning. That evening, I kept up the act. Asked Melissa about her day, cooked dinner together, even watched a show on Netflix like everything was fine. Inside, though, I was replaying the driver's words and Donna's casual admission that Melissa hadn't even seen her. I barely slept that night, my mind buzzing with what to do next. Over the next week, I started paying closer attention. Melissa's patterns had small cracks once I actually looked for them. She was suddenly protective of her phone, leaving it face down whenever she set it on the counter. There were cash withdrawals showing up on our joint account, always in odd amounts like $60 or $80, despite the fact that we almost never used cash for anything. She started leaving the apartment with vague explanations, running errands, meeting up with coworkers, but her stories didn't always line up when I casually circled back to them later. The more I noticed, the angrier I became, but I kept my cool. Instead of confronting, I decided to gather proof. If Melissa was lying once, she'd lie again. And when the truth finally came out, I wanted it to be undeniable. One night, she said she was going to meet a coworker after work for a project discussion. She came home around midnight. The next day, while she was in the shower, I checked her purse. Tucked in one of the smaller pockets was a charger I'd never seen before. It wasn't for her phone. It was for a different model entirely. That was when it hit me. She was either carrying or charging another device that she didn't want me to know about. I didn't find the phone itself, but the charger was enough to confirm the suspicion. Still, I didn't confront her. Not yet. What sealed it was a casual conversation with one of our neighbors, Harold, who lives a few doors down. He's an older guy who always sits out on the steps at night. One evening, I stopped to chat with him while Melissa was working late. Harold mentioned, offhand, that he'd seen her get dropped off a few nights ago by some guy in a car that wasn't mine. He thought nothing of it, assumed it was a family friend or coworker. I laughed it off at the time, but inside I felt my stomach clench. Between Harold's comment, Donna's earlier admission, and the scene at 5 a.m., it was impossible to ignore the truth anymore. I started forming a plan. I wasn't going to rely on gossip or circumstantial evidence. I wanted proof. Real proof. The kind no one could talk their way out of. That's when I thought about the taxi. If Melissa had really been dropped off from somewhere she shouldn't have been, then the company would have records. I called the taxi dispatch pretending to be a passenger who'd left something in the car. I gave them the pickup time and location I'd seen from the window. The dispatcher was polite, checked the records, and casually mentioned she'd been picked up outside a downtown hotel. That was it. Confirmation. Melissa had never gone to her mom's that night. She had been at a hotel until nearly dawn. By the time I hung up the phone, my hands were shaking. I finally had something solid. But instead of relief, I felt a cold anger settle in. She was lying straight to my face, smiling while she did it, and trusting that I'd never piece it together. I didn't say a word to her that night. I just sat on the couch, watching her scroll through her phone, pretending everything was normal. But in my head, the switch had already flipped. I wasn't going to let this go. This was just the beginning. After that morning when the taxi driver's words exposed her lie, my entire perspective on Melissa shifted. Everything I thought I knew about her now felt like an act. She laughed at my jokes, kissed me goodnight, made plans for our wedding like nothing was wrong. But in the background, she was spinning a web of deceit. I knew I couldn't just let it slide. If I confronted her without undeniable proof, she would deny, deflect, and twist it back on me. That was her nature. She had always been quick on her feet, the type who could win arguments by sheer force of confidence. So I slipped into the role of observer, treating my own life like a case file. Every little inconsistency became a clue. Every vague excuse was a thread to pull. I started documenting quietly. Times she left, the excuses she gave, when she came back, whether she carried anything with her. At first, I thought I was being paranoid, but the more I tracked, the clearer the pattern became. Melissa always had reasons to be gone late, but never on the same nights each week. It wasn't like she had a consistent work shift or regular schedule. It was random, which told me it wasn't about work. It was about opportunity. And every time she came home late, there was that faint trace of perfume I didn't recognize, like something meant to mask what she had really been doing. 2 nights after I called the taxi company and confirmed she had come from a hotel, she told me she was going to her mom's again. This time, instead of staying home, I decided to follow her. I waited 15 minutes after she left, then grabbed my jacket and slipped out quietly. My car was parked far enough down the block that she wouldn't notice it missing, and I drove slowly, keeping distance. Melissa didn't head toward her mom's neighborhood. She didn't even leave town. She drove straight to a downtown parking garage and left her car there. I parked on a side street and watched from a distance as she walked out, phone in hand, scanning the street like she was waiting for someone. Moments later, a black sedan pulled up. She climbed inside without hesitation. The car wasn't an Uber or a Lyft. I know because I checked the stickers. It was someone's personal vehicle. I tailed them as carefully as I could, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would shake the steering wheel. They didn't drive far. Just a few blocks away, they stopped in front of another hotel. Melissa got out with the driver, a tall guy with dark hair, maybe mid-30s. The way they moved together, close, casual, like they had done this dozens of times, told me everything. I watched as they walked through the lobby doors side by side. For the next hour, I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, forcing myself not to storm in and blow everything up. The rage was overwhelming, but underneath it was a colder instinct. I needed more than just my eyes. If this was going to end, it had to end in a way she couldn't spin, couldn't deny, couldn't flip onto me. The next day, Melissa acted like nothing had happened. She even kissed me on the cheek when I handed her a cup of coffee before work. That morning routine, something that once felt comforting, now felt staged. Like every kiss was a lie layered on top of another. Over the next 2 weeks, I followed her twice more. Both times, the pattern repeated. She left under some excuse, meeting her mom, late work, girls' night, then ended up at the same hotel with the same man. The third time, I got closer. I walked past the hotel's lobby pretending to be on a phone call, just to catch a glimpse. I saw her hand brush against his arm, the way she tilted her head toward him when she laughed. Intimate. Familiar. Intolerable. That night, back home, I checked our bank account again. More cash withdrawals. Always on days when she disappeared. Never huge amounts, just enough to cover expenses that she didn't want tracked. I realized then why she was doing it in cash. Hotel rooms, meals, maybe gifts. All hidden from the digital paper trail. But Melissa wasn't as clever as she thought. One evening, when she was in the shower, I went through her bag again. Tucked in a side pocket was a receipt from a restaurant I'd never been to. The date matched one of her late work nights. 2 meals, a bottle of wine. Paid in cash. That receipt, combined with the taxi records, her mother's denial, and my own eyes, gave me enough to see the full picture. Still, I needed one final piece. Something undeniable. I decided to test her. That weekend, I told her I was going to visit a college friend out of town. I even packed a small bag and left it by the door so she'd believe me. But instead of driving out of the city, I circled around and parked in a lot near our apartment. Then I waited. Sure enough, within an hour of me leaving, Melissa dressed up, put on makeup, and walked out. I followed from a distance, my chest tight, my jaw clenched. She didn't hesitate, didn't even look over her shoulder. She drove straight to the same garage, parked in her usual spot, and walked to the same hotel. This time, though, I went further. I slipped inside after her, staying back far enough that she wouldn't notice me. I saw her at the reception desk, speaking with the clerk, who smiled like he recognized her. My stomach turned. She wasn't some first-time visitor sneaking around nervously. She was a regular. When the clerk handed her a key card, she walked confidently toward the elevators. Moments later, the same man entered from the side entrance. They didn't even pretend to keep distance. He placed his hand on her back as they stepped into the elevator together. I stayed in the lobby, pacing, fighting the urge to follow them upstairs. The rational part of me knew barging in would get me nowhere. They'd deny, spin it, maybe even flip the narrative onto me being obsessive. But watching them walk into that elevator together burned the last of my doubts away. On my way out, I caught the clerk's eye and made a note of his name tag. I knew if I needed corroboration later, that man could provide it. She was in too deep for there to be any innocent explanation. Driving home that night, I felt a strange clarity. The rage was still there, but under it was purpose. This wasn't about catching her in the act anymore. It was about building a foundation she couldn't crawl out from under. And then fate threw me something I hadn't expected. The next morning, Harold, the neighbor who'd once mentioned seeing her with another guy, caught me in the hallway. He said casually that he'd noticed Melissa being dropped off again recently, sometimes by the same black sedan. He thought he was being helpful, warning me about strange cars in the neighborhood. But to me it was another nail in her coffin. Harold wasn't a gossip, he was just observant. If even he had noticed, then how many others had? By this point, Melissa must have thought I was clueless. She smiled at me over dinner, made wedding plans, and even suggested we start house hunting soon. Sitting across from her, while she talked about our future, felt surreal. It was like living with two versions of her. The woman I thought I was marrying, and the stranger sneaking off to hotel rooms with another man. I knew I was getting close to the breaking point. I had enough evidence to blow everything up, but I wanted her to bury herself further. The deeper she went, the harder it would be for her to wriggle free when the confrontation came. So I started preparing in secret. I kept a folder on my computer, locked with a password she didn't know. Inside, I stored scans of the receipts, notes from the taxi company, records of cash withdrawals, and even a timeline I'd written of her alibis versus her actual whereabouts. It felt obsessive at times, but I knew this wasn't paranoia. It was strategy. And then came the twist I didn't expect. One Thursday evening, Melissa said she had to work late. I followed as usual, expecting the same routine. But instead of heading downtown, she drove to a quiet residential street on the outskirts of town. I parked a few houses back and watched as she got out, walked up the driveway, and knocked on the door of a modest 2-story house. The door opened, and there he was, the same man from the hotel. This time, though, there was no disguise of anonymity. He hugged her at the doorway, kissed her cheek, and ushered her inside. My head spun. This wasn't just a fling confined to hotel rooms. He had a home, a life, and Melissa was stepping directly into it. I sat there for over an hour, my car engine off, watching the lights flicker on in different rooms. It was obvious she wasn't there to discuss work. Whatever this was, it went deeper than a casual affair. Melissa wasn't just lying about nights away. She was living a double life. When she finally returned home close to midnight, she walked in carrying a grocery bag with a bottle of wine and some leftovers. She smiled at me, said traffic had been bad. I stared at her, memorizing every detail of her face, every false word spilling from her mouth, while in my mind I replayed the image of her stepping into that man's house like she belonged there. That was the moment I knew the confrontation was inevitable, but I wasn't going to rush it. Not yet. I wanted it to hit her with the force of everything she had hidden. I wanted her to realize that every lie she had told had already been unraveled, every secret already exposed. And when it happened, I wanted her to know she had no way out. The longer I carried the secret knowledge of Melissa's double life, the heavier it felt. Every shared meal, every laugh, every wedding plan we discussed was like a performance on a stage I couldn't leave. I knew where she was going. I knew who she was seeing. And yet, I played the part of the oblivious fiancé. But silence only builds pressure, and eventually, something has to break. For me, the breaking point came on a Friday night. Melissa had said she was staying late at work. I didn't even ask for details. I just nodded, pretending to believe her, while already mapping out my route in my head. I followed her car once she left, my pulse hammering as if I hadn't done it a dozen times before. She parked in the same garage near the downtown hotel. I knew the drill by now. But tonight, I wasn't going to sit in my car taking notes. I parked a block away and waited until I saw her step out of the elevator with him, the tall, dark-haired man she thought I didn't know about. They looked like a couple in every sense. His hand rested casually on the small of her back, guiding her toward the doors. She tilted her head toward him, laughing at something he said, her eyes lit with a warmth I hadn't seen directed at me in months. Watching them walk side by side into the night made something inside me snap. I stepped out from the shadows just as they reached the curb. Melissa froze the instant she saw me. Her face drained of color, her mouth opening slightly as though she'd been caught stealing. The man turned, confused, until recognition hit him too. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lunge at him. I simply stood there, blocking their path, my eyes locked on Melissa. The silence between us was heavy enough to choke on. The man broke it first, muttering something about misunderstanding, and calmed down. That was when the fury I'd been suppressing boiled over. I stepped forward and told him in no uncertain terms that I knew exactly who he was and what had been going on. The calm edge in my voice seemed to catch him off guard more than shouting would have. Melissa tried to speak, stumbling over excuses about coworkers, projects, late-night meetings. Lies she'd rehearsed so often she probably believed them. But the words came out brittle, transparent. I pulled the folded receipts from my pocket, restaurant bills, cash withdrawals, even the taxi company confirmation I had printed out. I held them out between us, my hand steady. Her eyes darted to the papers, then back to me. She didn't reach for them. She knew what they were. Proof. The man, later I'd find out his name was Travis, shifted uncomfortably. He tried to brush it off, said it wasn't a big deal, said we should all talk this out. I laughed, bitter and sharp. Talk. After months of lies, after hotel rooms and secret rendezvous, he wanted to talk? By then, people had started to notice. The street wasn't crowded, but a handful of pedestrians slowed down, watching the scene unfold. The tension was palpable. Melissa's voice trembled as she told me I was overreacting, that we could discuss this at home. But she said it too loudly, too desperately, and the onlookers picked up on it. Then Travis made the mistake of putting his hand on my shoulder, as if he had the right to calm me down. Instinct took over. I shoved him back, hard enough that he stumbled into the side of a parked car. The metallic thud turned every head on the block. Someone must have called it in because within minutes, a patrol car rolled up. The officers stepped out, hands on their belts, assessing the situation. Melissa immediately tried to spin the story. She claimed I was jealous, paranoid, that I had been following her and attacking strangers. Her voice carried the tremor of false victimhood, a performance she thought would save her. But then something unexpected happened. The taxi driver, Harold, the one who had dropped her off at 5 a.m. weeks before, was walking past the intersection. He recognized her immediately and stopped, eyebrows raised. One of the officers noticed and asked if he knew any of us. Harold nodded. He told them he'd given her multiple rides, often late at night, and she had always been with this same man. He even remembered the morning when he called out, "Goodnight, babe," without realizing I was watching. His casual confirmation landed like a hammer. The officers turned back to Melissa, their faces neutral but sharp. She sputtered, trying to deny, but with Harold's statement and the stack of receipts in my hand, her facade collapsed. Travis had gone silent, clearly not wanting to be dragged into more trouble. One officer pulled me aside, asked if I wanted to press charges for the shove. I shook my head. I wasn't there to start a fight. I just wanted the truth exposed. In the end, the police didn't arrest anyone. They gave us a stern warning, told us to handle our personal issues somewhere else, and left after taking down notes. But the damage had been done. Melissa's reputation was shredded in public. Strangers had seen her lies unravel, and the taxi driver's words had cut through every excuse she might have tried. Back home, she tried to regain control. She pleaded, cried, swore it had been a mistake, that it didn't mean anything. I didn't respond. I just placed the folder on the kitchen table, the receipts, the notes, the timeline I'd been building. She flipped through the pages, her hands trembling, her lips moving soundlessly as she realized how thoroughly I had dismantled her story. Melissa's mask cracked then. She screamed, accused me of spying, of being manipulative, of setting her up. Her desperation reeked of guilt. When she realized her words weren't landing, she stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. The apartment was silent after that. Just me, the folder, and the echoes of everything I'd uncovered. For the first time in weeks, I felt clarity instead of chaos. The confrontation hadn't given me satisfaction. It had given me finality. There was no going back now. But what I didn't realize was that the fallout was only just beginning. Melissa wasn't done trying to salvage her life, even if it meant dragging me through more chaos first. When Melissa stormed out of the apartment that night, I sat there in silence, staring at the folder spread across the table. Every page in it represented another lie, another night stolen, another cut I hadn't felt until it was too late. The quiet after her outburst felt almost foreign. For weeks, my life had been an endless loop of suspicion, tailing her, piecing together fragments of the truth. Now the confrontation was over. The mask had been torn off, and I finally saw her for who she was. I didn't chase after her. I didn't call. Instead, I went to the bedroom, pulled out the box where we'd been keeping all our wedding plans, and placed it on the kitchen counter. A stack of brochures for venues, contracts half signed, notes about flowers and menus. All of it felt hollow now. I stared at the engagement ring still on her side of the dresser and felt nothing but the weight of wasted years. The next morning, she came back. Her eyes were red, her face streaked with makeup, but she tried to walk in like she still lived there. I stopped her at the door. She demanded to talk, said we could work through this, begged me not to throw everything away. But the irony was sharp. She had thrown it away the first night she stepped into that hotel. I told her plainly that the engagement was over. I wasn't asking, I was telling. She tried to argue, saying it had been a mistake, that I was blowing things out of proportion, that what happened didn't mean anything. The rehearsed lines came out one after another, but I stood firm. She wasn't used to me shutting her down so directly, and when she realized her words weren't working, she switched tactics. She accused me of spying, of invading her privacy, of manipulating the narrative. She even tried to suggest that maybe Harold, the taxi driver, had misunderstood what he saw. That was the moment I opened the folder again and laid it on the counter between us. She flipped through the receipts, the bank records, the taxi confirmation. Her hands shook as she reached the notes where I had matched her supposed alibis against her actual movements. There was no space left to wiggle through. Every lie had been mapped and cross-checked. Melissa's anger collapsed into desperation. She said we didn't need to involve anyone else, that we could handle this privately. But I wasn't interested in shielding her anymore. She had spent months using her mother as a cover story. Donna deserved to know the truth. That afternoon, I called Donna. I asked her to come by. When she arrived and saw her daughter standing in the kitchen looking guilty and cornered, she immediately asked what was going on. I didn't sugarcoat it. I explained what I had seen, what I had confirmed, and how Melissa had used Donna's name repeatedly as a shield for her lies. Donna's reaction was explosive. She turned on her daughter with a fury I had never seen in her before. She asked if Melissa had really dragged her name through the dirt just to cover her tracks. Melissa tried to deny it, but Donna cut her off. She told her she hadn't been blind, that she had suspected something was wrong when Melissa never actually visited. To see it confirmed in front of me, with evidence laid out, left her devastated. The argument between mother and daughter grew heated. Donna accused her of disrespect, of betrayal not just toward me, but toward family. She stormed out eventually, saying Melissa wasn't welcome in her house until she came clean. Melissa sat there crying, but even then, I couldn't find sympathy for her. I packed her things into boxes over the weekend. I changed the locks. I informed the landlord that Melissa would not be on the lease anymore. By Monday, she was gone from the apartment. That was when the wider fallout began. Melissa worked at a marketing firm in the city. Word spreads fast in offices, especially when people are seen sneaking around hotels downtown. The taxi driver had mentioned giving her rides more than once, and it didn't take long before whispers made their way into her workplace. I wasn't the one who spread it, but I didn't need to. People talk. By the end of the week, I heard from a mutual acquaintance that her reputation at work had taken a hit. She wasn't fired, but she was suddenly excluded from projects, her boss questioning her reliability. Her social circle fractured too. Melissa had always been the type to present herself as loyal, dependable, the perfect fiancée. When friends learned that she had been lying to me for months, sneaking into hotels while planning a wedding, they started pulling away. Even the people who stayed friendly with her didn't trust her the same way anymore. She had built her entire image on stability, and that image was gone. As for Travis, the man she'd been meeting, he vanished. I later heard he had blocked her, cut off contact, and refused to acknowledge her when she tried reaching out. It turned out he had his own life, his own commitments, and Melissa had just been a fling he wasn't willing to risk anything serious for. She had destroyed an engagement for a man who wouldn't even pick up her calls when things got messy. Meanwhile, my own life, though bruised, began to stabilize. Friends who had once looked at us as a perfect couple reached out to support me. Donna checked in more often, apologizing repeatedly for her daughter's behavior. She admitted she wished she had seen the signs earlier, but I told her the responsibility was Melissa's alone. I canceled the wedding venue, the honeymoon reservations, everything tied to the future we'd been planning. Some deposits were non-refundable, but I didn't care. Watching her unravel was worth more than any money lost. Melissa tried one last time to salvage things. She showed up outside my workplace a week later, begging me to give her another chance. She said we had invested too much time together, that she regretted everything, that she couldn't picture her life without me. But when I looked at her, I didn't see the woman I had once loved. I saw a liar who had gambled with my trust and lost. I told her plainly that we were finished, and that if she kept showing up, I'd involve HR and the police. She didn't come back after that. The weeks that followed were strange. I had grown used to suspicion, to watching her every move, to living in a state of constant investigation. Without that weight, I felt a mix of relief and emptiness. Nights were quiet. Mornings were mine again. For the first time in months, I wasn't questioning what was real. Melissa, on the other hand, faced the slow burn of consequences. Her mother wouldn't speak to her. Her job grew colder. Friends kept their distance. And the man she'd risked everything for treated her like she didn't exist. The life she had built on secrecy and deception crumbled piece by piece, until she was left standing in the wreckage. As for me, I didn't gloat. I didn't brag. I just let the truth stand on its own. People saw what she had done, and that was enough. Sometimes, I still think back to that morning at 5 a.m., when the taxi pulled up outside and Harold called out, "Good night, babe." That careless sentence from a stranger shattered the illusion I had been living in. Without it, I might have gone on planning a wedding, blind to the reality happening in hotel lobbies and side streets. But because of it, I saw everything. And once you see the truth, you can never unsee it. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day, and trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.